Well, the Constitutional Court has just dismissed the Public Protector's challenge to the invalidation of her report on President Cyril Ramaphosa's CR17 campaign finances. Reaction now on this particular decision. We're joined by Sibongile Besani, the ANC's Head of the Presidency. Mr. Besani, thank you very much for your time. So while the court was scathing on Public Protector, the President, on the other hand, does seem to have a thing or two to answer about transparency as far as the matters involving the financing of his campaign to become ANC President. Your reaction?
Thank you very much, Colin. Thanks to the viewers at home. We are pleased with the decision of the Constitutional Court, and that is always the attitude of the ANC, the attitude of the President, that once the apex courts have decided past judgments, ours is to oblige, because we're a country that believes in the rule of law, a country whose fight for freedom has been anchored on ensuring that there is constitutionality, there is democracy. And indeed, issues of transparency, accountability are also issues that cannot be avoided. Now, if you look at what we have just heard from the Constitutional Court, is that the issues that Amabungani had raised around the ethics code or code of ethics in Parliament are issues that should have been heard by the High Court. Now we have no qualms with that decision. Of course, it demonstrates, this decision, its entirety demonstrates that nobody is above the law. It demonstrates the commitment of President Cyril Ramaphosa to abide by the apex court. So we think the decision speaks to our democratic state, speaks to our constitutional state, and speaks to the fact that once information is acquired from private people in ways that are unpalatable, every one of us has got the right to go to the courts of law and echo his displeasure.
Well, Mr. Besani, I guess one would want to get it clear from your side, particularly as a person who sits in the President's office in the ANC. What do you think is going to be the next move of the President, particularly on this issue of transparency? The EFF has been quite clear that just open up the books. Is that what the President is going to have to do here ultimately?
Well, I think the President has stated it on several occasions that we have to make sure that we become more transparent. And I think the President has made several proposals to the NEC. The NEC is yet to ventilate how the issues of money for campaigns internally have got to be handled. And I think that discussion will continue within the ANC, because the President has been upfront on how these matters should be handled in the most transparent and accountable manner. And you would know that currently there is legislation underway or in place on how political parties should account with regards to their donations and so on. I think as a matter of principle, it is proper to state that the country has somehow moved forward to ensure that political parties account for their donations. And of course, the President has made a number of proposals to the NEC. And at the right time, I suppose the NEC will concretely decide on how these matters should be handled too.
And given how divisive the issue of funding of political campaigns has become for the ANC, and also in appreciation of the very political party funding act that you speak about, would it not be desirable for the party, for its own survival, but also in line with what this ANC NEC, as led by President Ramaphosa, promised South Africans, that it would be transparent, that political campaigns within the party also become transparent?
Look, I think ideally it would be quite desirable for political parties to become more open about where they get funds and how do they mobilize financial resources, whether internally and otherwise. I think ideally it would be more desirable. But it becomes more desirable if such a process is applicable to everybody. If you look at, in this instance, there has been quite a strong push for the campaign, the CR17 campaign, to disclose, whereas other political parties who demand such openness are unable to disclose their financial resources. So if it is applicable to everybody, I don't think the president, even the broader family of the African National Congress will hold qualms about that.
So effectively, in principle, you agree with the sentiment, or rather the case as raised by Amapungane?
No, I don't know the details of the case of Amapungane. The Amapungane, if you look at it, when I glance at it, theirs is about the ethics code, and I think it's a case that must be ventilated, because we would not know how the technicalities that relates to that particular case. I'm only raising an issue of principle that ideally, if we are demanded as the ANC to disclose how we mobilize financial resources in terms of the internal campaigns, if that is the case, the ANC would not reject that as long as it is not something that is applicable only to the African National Congress. So I don't think it would be something that the ANC would reject, as long as other parties would be sort of subjected to similar, I would say, processes.
Yeah, well, Mr. Besani, you speak about this process needing to be applicable to everybody, and you mention other political parties. But for those listening, and we know that this matter centers specifically around an individual's campaign within the ANC who wanted to become president and ultimately did become the president. That question, I wonder if it is going to extend to other candidates who were vying for the same position. And that question, though, I'd like you to hold that thought for the moment. Let's quickly bring into the discussion our senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is at the Constitutional Court. Ziyanda, good morning to you. Give us the salient points for you that came out of this particular judgment.
Well, certainly, Xoli, I would say that this is a victory for Amapungane in the sense that the Constitutional Court found that the Pretoria High Court erred in not actually dealing with the contents that Amapungane have raised. You'll know, Xoli, that Amapungane were wanting to actually have the Constitutional Court review whether or not the executive members' code is actually sufficient enough in its current form, and whether or not it should broaden its scope to include then, the donations made to individuals within Parliament. Now, also the Constitutional Court finding that Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane had no right or jurisdiction to tell the National Assembly or the National Director of Public Prosecutions how to met out their particular remedial action. What she did have an obligation to do was to report back, but not necessarily give an instruction or give a suggestion as to what exactly should be done by the National Assembly. Another issue that, of course, came out here today, Xoli, was dealing then with the suspicions of money laundering. The Constitutional Court basically maintaining the earlier findings of the Pretoria High Court that the Public Protector erred in the manner in which she interpreted the law, and her findings therefore will have no basis within the law. But also the issue of the emails, Xoli, coming out saying that even the public protector herself conceded that she did not independently verify them, the authenticity of those particular emails, but yet in her report, she still also used some of the content that came out from those particular emails. And so also finding that the public protector failed to implement from a procedural perspective the audi partem principle, which means hearing the other side. She did not grant the president an opportunity for him to give his side of the story when it came to these emails, but in particular to this allegation of money laundering. So ultimately here, the president will have to pay for the legal costs of Amapungane when the matter has to now be reviewed by the High Court, but ultimately this court maintaining the earlier findings made by the Pretoria High Court.
Right, Zena Ngobo, thank you very much for crystallizing that for us. Some particular aspects of this judgment. Let's quickly bring back Sibongile Besani. Mr. Besani, we know we need to let you go. That final question, and as I put it to you, you are very clear that if this issue of transparency needs to be carried through by the president, and therefore it should apply to others as well. You've mentioned political parties who may not necessarily be willing to do that in your words, but let's center it around the ANC political campaigns. What are you saying about those that campaigned alongside President Ramaphosa, who were vying for the very same position of president? Is that what you're saying, that they also should open up their books? Mr. Besani, I think you are muted right now. I can't hear you.
Oh, the point is that, sorry for that, Colin.
No worries.
The point I was trying to make, Paul, is that I was trying to answer a question as to the president, does he have a problem with being transparent with the CR17 donations? And the point I'm making is President Cyril Ramaphosa has actually gone further to make quite elaborate proposals to the NEC on the issue of inter-party campaign, internal issues campaign, as to how transparent they should be. And obviously, once the organization ventilates the matter and adopts a particular way, a particular approach to this, for an example, in line with the proposals of President, which in essence they say, let's try to be more open, let's try to be more transparent about these issues. So once the organization adopts that approach internally also, obviously that will be applicable to everybody. In this instance, the issue is that there was an approach to target the president and to link the president, to target the president, so to say, on being transparent about these monies. Whereas other people in other parties, when they were doing their internal campaigns, they were not coming to the party to say, look, President, we are open, or CR17. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Yeah, I was saying, people who were demanding this kind of transparency, they had also not led by example to demonstrate that they have been open about their campaigns. But most importantly, what was at the heart of the legal issue, the legal battle here, was the manner in which that information was accessed, and then and the legal issues around whether it was proper for the public protector to investigate that. And I think the courts have now ventilated and vindicated the president in most unprecedented ways. So we are comfortable with that. So whatever, if people expect transparency, the president of the ANC is not against any form of transparency. And we hope that it will not be transparency only applicable to the African National Congress or to specific, it has to be applicable to the general public and other political parties in that regard.